12 things are going in the ground this month, and each one earns its spot on this list for a different reason. The date on the calendar has nothing to do with it. What matters is something specific happening inside that particular plant right now. The kind of thing that does not happen in June or July. One of them is not even a vegetable. Another one everybody assumes is about temperature, and it never was. This video walks through all 12. The actual mechanism behind each one, not just the name and a vague, "now's a good time." If your first frost is still 6 to 8 weeks away, tell me your zone below, because a few of these are working against exactly that clock right now. Number 1. Garlic. You've got a mesh bag of garlic bulbs sitting on the kitchen counter, and some part of you is sure you already missed the window weeks ago. The first cloves I ever planted came from a farmer's market bag, tucked into the ground on a warm March afternoon because that felt like the season for planting things. By July, I pulled up nothing but round single bulbs, no cloves to split apart. I stood in the driveway turning one over in my hand, sure I'd bought the wrong kind of garlic. Here's what nobody puts together when they're staring at that calendar. Garlic doesn't care what the date says. It's counting cold. Your garlic bulb doesn't care what day it is. A bulb that sits through 6 to 8 weeks of steady chill, somewhere between 32 and 50 degrees. Reeds that stretch as winter, and winter is the signal to split into cloves come spring. Skip the cold, and the plant just grows a single round bulb instead. The same thing I dug up that July. For most of the country, planting in September solves this on its own. Music is the one I'd point you toward, a hard-neck porcelain garlic that shrugs off a hard winter in zones 3 through 7. Set the cloves 2 inches deep, pointed end up. 4 inches of mulch on top, 6 to 8 weeks before the ground locks up solid. Gardening in zone 8, 9, or 10. The ground itself won't hand your clothes that cold. You have to fake it yourself, 4 to 8 weeks in the refrigerator crisper before you plant. 6 weeks of real cold is what splits one bulb into a full head of garlic. Number 2. Kale. If you've been eating kale straight out of the summer garden and thinking that's as good as it gets, you haven't tasted it yet. That bitter edge you remember from kale salads? That's summer kale talking. The same cold that frosts your windshield flips a switch inside the leaf, too. The plant converts its stored starch into sugar, a kind of built-in antifreeze that keeps the cell walls from tearing apart when ice forms. That sugar just happens to taste a lot better than the starch it replaced. Zero extra effort on your part. Plant red Russian kale now, and it shrugs off cold clear down to zone 3, feeding you long after most of the garden has quit for the year. Get seed in the ground 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost. Then let the plant sit through 1 or 2 cold snaps before you cut a single leaf. One frost and the same leaf tastes like a different vegetable. Number 3. Spinach. Number 3 on this list, this is the one I promised you earlier, the one that has nothing to do with heat at all. You waited for it to cool down enough last month and gave up when nothing happened. The problem was never the temperature. The thermometer gets blamed every time spinach bolts and turns bitter by July. I blamed it too, for years. Here's what the plant is actually tracking, and it isn't degrees. Spinach counts hours of daylight. I was reading a photoperiod study on spinach one evening and hit a line that reframed the whole thing for me. Once daylight crosses somewhere around 13 to 15 hours a day, a hormone inside the plant switches on and pushes it toward flowering, whether the air feels cool or not. Once your days shrink below that line, the plant stops trying to bolt. Drop below that line, and the plant barely bolts at all, no matter how hot the afternoon still gets. That's the whole reason September works when June never did. Almost everywhere in the country, the days have already fallen under that trigger point by now, so the plant simply stops trying to reproduce and puts everything into leaf instead. Get Bloomsdale Longstanding in the ground now. An old heirloom that holds up fine down to 15 degrees, and you're looking at 45 to 52 days to a full harvest. Longer still if you throw a row cover over the bed once real frost shows up. If your spinach bolted in June, no matter how much shade you gave it, that's the day length talking, not the thermometer. Shade never stood a chance against the calendar. Shrinking daylight is the switch. Once it flips, spinach quits trying to flower and just keeps making leaves for you clear into early winter. Number 4. Carrots. You pull a carrot out of the ground on a cold October morning and it tastes almost nothing like the one you pulled in August. That's not chance. That's the carrot fighting for its life. When the ground turns cold, the carrot dumps its stored starch straight into sugar. Glucose, fructose, sucrose flood the root like antifreeze poured into a radiator. And that sugar lowers the freezing point inside every cell, so the root survives temperatures that would otherwise turn it to mush. What that actually means for your fall carrots is simple. You don't need a hard freeze to see the change. One good frost is enough to tip the balance. Napoli, a Nantes-type carrot, hits harvest at 60 to 70 days. Right on schedule to sit through at least one frost before the ground locks up hard almost anywhere in the country. I stood out in the garden in November once, hands numb around my coffee mug, and bit into a carrot I'd just pulled after the first hard frost. Tasted like it had been roasted in honey, and I hadn't seasoned a single thing. One frost is what turns a plain carrot into the sweetest thing in your garden that year. Number 5. Cilantro. You'd decided you're just bad at growing cilantro because it bolts within a week. You were growing it in the wrong season, not the wrong way. I put a June planting next to a September planting once. Same seed packet, same bed, same water schedule. The June plants threw up a flower stalk before I'd even harvested a full handful. The September plants just kept making leaves, week after week. That gap wasn't close. Cilantro answers to 2 triggers at once, heat and long days. Summer hands it both. The plant reads the lengthening daylight as a signal that it's running out of time to make seeds before the heat kills it, so it rushes to flower. By September, the days are shortening again, and the heat is dropping off, so both triggers disappear at the same time. The plant just keeps growing leaves instead of racing to reproduce. That's the exact swing your cilantro bed goes through every September. Calypso is the variety I'd grab, bred to hold off bolting longer than most. Direct sow it into most zones in the country this month. A light frost barely slows it down. Sow a new batch every 2 to 3 weeks and you'll have a steady supply of leaves that lasts far longer than anything you planted in June. Same seeds you bought in June. The month is what changed everything about this plant. Number 6. Broccoli. Compare the broccoli you tried to grow in spring with the broccoli you plant right now, and it's almost not a fair fight. Spring broccoli races against rising heat. The moment temperatures climb too fast mid-season, the plant panics and buttons, throwing up a tiny head before it's anywhere near full size. Fall broccoli does the opposite. It heads up while temperatures are dropping, not rising, so the plant takes its time and builds a bigger, tighter head instead of rushing to flower. For the effort involved, this isn't even a close call. That's why your fall broccoli bed looks nothing like your spring one. A woman wrote to me about her spring broccoli bed. Heads no bigger than a golf ball the moment they were barely big enough to cut. She'd babied that bed all spring, checking it daily, and still ended up with something closer to broccolini than broccoli. The next year she switched to a fall planting instead. Same seed, same bed, same spacing. The heads came in twice the size, and she said she'd done less work to get there. Cabbage worms and flea beetles both slow way down by late summer, hunting for somewhere to spend the winter instead of your broccoli leaves. Don't get comfortable though. Clemson extension flags one exception. Aphids actually show up more in cool fall weather, not less. So keep checking the undersides of your leaves even after the caterpillars have moved on. Waltham 29 is the cold hardy variety for this. Transplant it anywhere from mid-July to September, depending on your zone, and expect 60 to 70 days from transplant to harvest. Same seeds, cooler weather does the rest. If this level of detail on why fall vegetables actually work is what you've been looking for, subscribe and hit the bell. Every video runs at this same level of specific. Number 7. Collard greens. You pick collards once after the first frost, taste that sweetness and figure that's the whole story. It's not even the beginning of it. Shift the picture from one sweet moment to an entire season of repeat harvests. Collards are one of the toughest brassicas out there, riding out frost after frost long after Kale and Chard have given up for the year. Each new cold snap triggers another round of that same starch-to-sugar switch happening inside the leaf. So the flavor resets and sharpens every time, instead of fading after the first frost like everything else in the bed. That's the reset happening in your collard bed every time the temperature drops. 3 frosts in one November. I was still picking from the same collard plant for the 3rd time. New leaves kept coming in, like the cold was feeding it instead of hurting it. By January, that one plant had fed me more meals than the whole spring lettuce bed combined. Georgia Southern is the variety built for this kind of punishment. It overwinters on its own in Zone 8 and warmer, standing in the garden right through the coldest stretch. In colder zones, it still holds up through cold down into the high teens with nothing more than a floating row cover thrown over it on the worst nights. Get transplants or seed into the ground this month, then just keep pulling the outer leaves, one frost after another, for months on end, leaving the center to keep growing. Each new frost just resets the flavor and starts the sweetness over, not even close to a one-and-done crop. Stay with me, because the next one on this list isn't even a vegetable, and it changes how you think about the whole month. Number 8. Strawberries. Here it is, the one I promised at the start, the one that isn't a vegetable at all. Put 2 strawberry patches side by side, one you plant in spring, one you plant right now. Plant in spring, and you have to pinch off every single flower that first year. All that energy has to go into building roots instead of fruit, which means 0 berries your first summer. This is the one that changed how I plan my whole strawberry patch. Plant bare root in September instead, and the whole winter becomes root building time while the plant sits dormant. No flowers to sacrifice, because there's nothing trying to bloom yet. The plant spends December through February doing one job only, pushing roots deep and wide, so that when spring finally wakes it up, the roots are already established and ready to feed flowers and fruit right away. Energy goes straight into flowers and fruit instead of catching up on roots it should have grown months earlier. A gardener in Ohio, Zone 6, wrote to me after years of spring planting, pinching off flowers and waiting out a whole summer for nothing. Last year, she ordered bare root plants instead, tucked them in at the end of August, and buried the bed under a thick layer of mulch for the winter. Come spring, her first harvest was double anything she'd pulled in past years. June-bearing types are the ones that make this gap so obvious, since they're the exact type forced to sit out year 1 if planted in spring. Look for Zone 7 and warmer for the most reliable results. If your winters regularly drop below 20 degrees, spring planting is the safer call instead. Get bare root plants in the ground 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost, giving roots enough runway before the ground goes hard. Bare root plants also run 40 to 60% cheaper than potted ones, mostly because they're so much lighter and cheaper to ship. The bare root patch you plant in September is the one eating berries by June. Number 9. Swiss chard. Chard sits in the same bed as your beets all fall, but it never bolts the way the beets sometimes do. You won't find this explained on the back of the seed packet. Chard and beets come from the same family, and both are biennials. Year 1 is entirely off the table for flowering, no matter how much cold the plant sits through. Energy keeps pouring into leaves, month after month, because the plant isn't old enough yet to turn toward seed making. It needs a full winter behind it first, and this September planting hasn't earned that yet. Bright Lights is the variety for this, an easy, colorful chard that holds up through light to moderate frost. Sow it this month, then keep pulling the outer leaves for months, right up until a real hard freeze finally slows things down. Chard doesn't know it's supposed to quit, so it doesn't. Number 10. Radishes. Radish gets treated like the boring starter crop for kids. It's actually a race against the calendar, and fall is the only season where you're not losing that race. Heat and long days gang up on radish in ways that go past just making it bolt faster. Both push the root to pack in more of a sulfur compound that turns the flesh sharp and spongy instead of crisp. That's not an accident. A radish grown in the stretch of long, hot days between June and August is fighting both pressures at once, racing to flower before it even has time to swell into a decent root. What that actually means for your radishes is simple. A summer-grown radish and a fall-grown radish from the exact same seed packet can taste like two entirely different vegetables, even though nothing about the seed itself changed. Cherry Belle is the classic pick here. A round red and white root that's easy for a first-time grower to get right and forgiving if you're a week late thinning the row. It's ready in 22 to 28 days, and the whole crop only needs 25 to 35 days start to finish. Short enough to sow 2 or 3 batches back to back before the ground freezes hard, giving you a rolling harvest instead of one big pull. I pulled a radish in June once and bit straight into it standing in the row. Pure fire, spongy all the way through, the kind of bite that makes you set the rest down. I pulled that same variety again from a September sowing months later. Crisp all the way to the center, just a little sweet, none of that harsh bite left at all. In spring, you're racing the heat. In fall, the calendar is finally on your side. Number 11. Fall peas. Every pea vine in your yard is doing something you'll never actually see. Every pea root grows tiny nodules packed with rhizobium bacteria, and the two strike a deal down there in the dark. The bacteria pull nitrogen straight out of the air and hand it to the plant in a form the roots can actually use. And in return, the plant feeds them sugar it makes in its leaves. When the pea plant finishes its life cycle this winter, that nitrogen doesn't leave with it. It stays behind in the soil, right where next spring's bed needs it most. Farmers who grow pea varieties as a cover crop see this add up to more than 200 pounds of nitrogen an acre in a good year. Though a small backyard bed obviously works on a much smaller scale than a whole field does. That's nitrogen your soil banks for free while you're just picking pods. Sugar Snap is the variety worth planting for this. A sweet, crisp-podded pea that's been a garden favorite for decades. Get seed into the ground 8 to 10 weeks before your first frost, with soil sitting somewhere between 45 and 70 degrees for the best germination. For the money. Nothing else on this list pays you back twice like this one does. If you're gardening in zone 3 or 4, the September window usually runs too short for pods to mature before a hard frost shuts things down. So peas make more sense as a spring crop there instead. You harvested a vegetable. You also just fertilized next spring's bed without spending $1 on it. Number 12. Overwintering onions. The onion transplant you tuck into the ground this month is the size of a pencil. By next July, it can be the size of a softball. Same plant, one winter in between. 12 entries in, and this last one pays off the longest of anyone on the list. I put a spring-planted onion and a fall-planted onion of the same variety side by side one year, and the gap wasn't close. Size has nothing to do with how big the plant looks the day you put it in the ground. What actually decides bulb size is the day length at the moment the plant flips over from making leaves to making a bulb. A fall-planted onion in the warmer zones can grow 10 to 13 leaves before the long days of late spring hit that trigger point. Wait and plant that same variety in spring, and it never catches up to that leaf count before bulbing starts. Every one of those leaves becomes a ring in the bulb later. So more leaves banked before the trigger means a bigger onion after it. That gap is baked in months before you ever see a bulb forming. Juno is the variety built for this, an intermediate day type that handles cold well and holds a reputation as one of the more reliable overwintering onions available to home gardeners. It overwinters most reliably in zone 6 and warmer with a moderate winter. In harsher zones, plan on a thick layer of mulch for protection, or lean toward a long day variety planted in late winter instead. A gardening friend of mine, on the same half-acre for more than 30 years, only ever plants onions one way, always fall, never spring. He told me once that a spring-planted onion is trying to catch up in a race it already lost at the starting line. Set transplants, or sets, in the ground 4 to 6 weeks before the soil freezes hard. All winter, that onion is quietly banking every leaf it can before the clock even starts. 12 entries, and every single one had its own reason for September. Not a fill-in-the-blank calendar rule. Garlic wanted the cold, onions wanted the long light, and spinach wanted the short one. 3 completely different reasons that all point to the same month. Once you know why a plant wants this month, you stop guessing whether you already missed your shot. One more thing before we wrap up. Every one of these 12 has a breaking point where a hard freeze arrives faster than the calendar promised. An old bedsheet or a gallon milk jug with the bottom cut out. Thrown over anything on this list on a surprise cold night buys you another 2 to 3 weeks of harvest for free. Any for the action. Tonight, pull up your first frost date and count back 6 to 8 weeks. If that lands anywhere before next weekend, order bare root strawberries tonight, because that's the one item on this whole list that doesn't wait around for you to make up your mind. Which one of the 12 are you planting this weekend? I read every comment, and it's exactly how I decide what to grow test next. From here to the next hard frost, every reason on this list only gets more specific.